there's a branch of Ayurveda called Rasayana, and that's the study of longevity. And rasa means a handful of things, but rasa means lymph, rasa means taste, rasa means emotion, and it means really, in a way, special fluid. And so the study of these special fluids are very, very important. And rasa is the very first tissue that the body makes, and it starts when you put the food in your mouth. It creates a substance called ahara rasa. It's the first food bolus of the food that you eat. And what's interesting about Rasayana is that we always think Rasayana therapy, give me the pill to take to make me live forever. You know, that's sort of our mentality. But that's only one of the Rasayana therapies is actually taking a pill. The other 4 or 5 major Rasayanas are all about lifestyle, diet, daily routine, lifestyle, how you treat and care for others.
That was Dr. John Douillard, and this is the Alter Your Health podcast, your source of information and inspiration to promote the holistic transformation of your health and the health of our planet. And I'm Dr. Benjamin Alter, the host of this podcast. I am a licensed naturopathic doctor and holistic lifestyle medicine practitioner, really supporting you in understanding how your body heals itself and empowering you to be your own healer. If you'd like to learn more and follow along with all we've got going over at Alter Health, head on over to www.alter.health, or better yet, jump into our Facebook group, which is a growing community of like-minded self-healing individuals just like you, empowered self-healers. That's the name of the Facebook group. So facebook.com/groups/alterhealth, and join us and join the conversation of self-healing. So one more thing that we're so excited about over at Alter Health is the Medicinal Living online course and mastermind. The online course is a 6-week self-guided course guiding you through all aspects of lifestyle medicine, from nutritional science to other aspects of lifestyle, as well as mindset, cultivating a healing mindset, understanding the mind-body connection, and leveraging that connection to support your health and longevity transformation in your own life. So if you'd like more information about the course or the mastermind, which is essentially the course plus additional guidance each and every week from myself and Dr. Susanna, you can head on over to www.alter.health/course. The first mastermind will be beginning really soon on November 3rd. But if you missed that one, no problem. Our intention is to offer this mastermind every couple months or so. So stay tuned for the next one, which will be just around the corner. Anyways, into today's episode with Dr. John Douillard. Dr. Douillard is a DC Doctor of Chiropractic Medicine and author of 7 health books and 7 online courses, as well as numerous free ebooks, like many ebooks. There are so many resources on lifespa.com. It is absolutely like almost overwhelming, but it's all good stuff, I promise you. And there are also a number of cleanses that Dr. Douillard has created and is offering through lifespa.com. And these cleanses are based on ancient Ayurvedic wisdom, blended with an understanding of modern science. And that's really what we talk about in our conversation. Dr. Douillard's background, getting into Ayurvedic medicine, Ayurvedic healing. And we also talk about how Ayurveda and Ayurvedic philosophy is really relevant in our modern society. Even this ancient tradition, ancient healing wisdom really does have some real relevance, more so than ever really in our modern society. We talk about longevity and the science behind longevity and how Ayurveda does capture that science in its ancient wisdom and some ways to promote longevity through living in a way that is balanced and aligned with the cycles of nature's circadian medicine, as Dr. Douillard explains, as well as activating stem cells through caloric restriction or a fasting mimicking sort of diet, which is offered in some of his cleanses, as well as going inward, or what he refers to as drawing back the bow. And I love that metaphor, pointing us inward and really, harnessing energy within, and also withdrawing the senses to our overly stimulated, chaotic world. Because let's face it, we do live in a world where we are constantly stimulated. That stress response, that baseline stress response, is really kind of elevated and becomes kind of the new norm for so many of us. So going into your cave, so to speak, for a little retreat is really an active, really powerful way to activate the autophagy and stem cells and all of these, and increase the length of your telomeres, all of these things that we know as being powerful ways of extending health, extending life, and increasing longevity. Just a reminder, if you are a new listener and have not yet done so and are interested in supporting this message and getting empowering, healing information out there more broadly to people just like you and me, whether you're tuned in on iTunes or YouTube or any other podcast, video, or audio platform, I would so appreciate just the 1 minute it would take to leave a comment, provide some feedback, and also share this to people that you know and love who would benefit from connecting and hearing information from wise people like our guest, Dr. Douillard. So go ahead and sit back, relax, take a breath, exhale, and enjoy this great conversation with our guest, Dr. John Douillard. Hello and welcome to the podcast, Dr. John Douillard. So happy to have you on the Alter Your Health podcast.
Great to be here.
And I'd like to share just how I became acquainted with you and your work. It went back to, I think it was 2011. I was in the Institute for Integrative Nutrition program, and I was exposed to one of your teachings. And one thing that has literally stuck with me since that moment was the kind of take-home point from your talk, from your lecture, was just to maybe inviting listeners to see the world and relate to the world through a lens of Ayurveda, like through a lens that invited balance, invited an understanding of connection with nature. And that literally has stuck with me throughout my further medical training and education, and really appreciate that philosophy, that underlying philosophy. So thank you.
Oh, you're welcome.
And I'd like to maybe start the conversation just getting to know you and your journey a little bit, because I know obviously you're really focused in Ayurveda, but where did that start? When did that start? And what was the inspiration that led you along your path?
Wow, that's a long time ago, really. That was back in the early 80s. I was in chiropractic college and studying acupuncture, doing a 500-hour acupuncture program, and then heard the word Ayurveda. I don't know, something just clicked in my head. I just was like, yeah, I just needed to know more about it. There wasn't a lot available back then in the States with regard to Ayurveda, but I started doing what I could to study, and then I ended up getting, some friends of mine, when the Chinese government, it was in 80, that was by the time, it was 86, they had opened up their borders to ride, you could go into Tibet, and we were going to ride mountain bikes from Lhasa, Tibet to Kathmandu. And we had all the permits and everything. We were working on it for 6 months. And my mom, my sister calls me up, and her husband was a very famous magician at the time, Doug Henning, back in a long time ago, did a lot of TV specials, and he was like the before David Copperfield magician. And he had this like lucid dream that there was like this big accident and the road collapsed and I was paralyzed from the waist down. And he looked at, and they said, please don't go on this trip. And I was like, wow, really? You guys can't you really can't tell someone that, because we've planned this whole thing out. And then my mom calls me up like 3 weeks later or 2 weeks later, and she says, right around the same time Doug had his sort of vision, um, I also had a dream, a really sort of lucid dream, that there was this big accident and you were severely injured. And I really think you should think twice about going. And again, I was sort of really frustrated, and I thought about it, and I decided not to do it. But I had all that time scheduled. So I ended up going to India, and my sister was there, studying meditation there. So I ended up going and ended up to try to study Ayurveda. I had the time there anyway. So I went to study Ayurveda. And the next thing I knew, I was invited to stay permanently and study with an Ayurvedic teacher. And so I was there for 3 weeks. And then I closed my practice in Boulder, Colorado in 1986 on a really scratchy phone from New Delhi that no one could really hear each other. But the basic point was I wasn't coming home. And I didn't really come home for like a year and a half. And when I did, somebody I didn't even know was driving my car. My stuff was in a couple of different houses. It was just like, go gather what you could and, put your life back together. But it was one of those yes moments where you just knew that this was a lifetime opportunity that never would come. So I ended up doing that. And then I spent about a year and a half there, some going back and forth, ended up getting married during that period of time, ended up getting pregnant during that period of time, met Deepak Chopra during that period of time, and came back and ran his center in Massachusetts for 8 years because we had to get out of India because we were having a baby, So that was sort of the beginning of the journey, and it really was magical, and I think partly because I didn't think about it, I just did it, and I didn't think of the reason why I shouldn't do it or couldn't do it. I mean, there were all kinds of reasons. I didn't pay my taxes for a year and a half. I mean, there were all kinds of reasons why I had $50,000 in student loans. There were all kinds of reasons why I shouldn't have been done. I should have been taking it more seriously. But that's how it started.
I love that. I love how you allowed your heart to lead you, and I think a lot of times we try to rationalize ourselves out of that, especially in our world today. So it's a good kind of example of the heart never leading us astray, because obviously it led you to exactly where you needed to be to acquire your wisdom, come back here and share it. And it's like sometimes not thinking about things with our intellect is the way to go. So that's very cool. And your focus of your practice is really intriguing to me because it really blends the ancient wisdom with the modern science. Because I think a lot of people look at Ayurveda and say, oh, it's this like old 1,000-year-old tradition. What relevance does it have in modern day world? So I'm curious, in your practice, in your studies, are there parts of Ayurvedic philosophy that are not relevant today, or is everything in Ayurveda very much relevant and applicable in today's world?
That's a really good question. I don't think that everything in ancient times was necessarily, and I'm sure that there are many people more brilliant than I that would say something different here. But I don't necessarily believe that just because it's ancient, it's gospel. To me, I have a very pragmatic mind. It has to make sense logically to me. And then I like to see some of the stuff that's really backed by some modern science. But just the fact that something is time tested, has been around for a couple of thousand years. In a lot of ways, things that don't work don't last, right? We know that. So then you start thinking, how did this stuff last for so long if it didn't have some hint of wisdom? Now, I think that you can sort of hack some of the ancient principles with modern techniques and not have to do it the ancient way and upgrade them a little bit. Like Krimi, for example, where the original probiotics talked about in the Rig Veda. Well, now we have probiotics that you can take, and there's all different kinds, and the understanding of the microbiome is way deeper now than what they may have understood. But they understood that they were there. They understood that you don't want to kill any of them, good or bad. You want to just change the environment. So they basically bring themselves back into balance because they're vested in keeping us alive, and they knew that. way back when. We are just figuring that out now. But it's a really great question, and there are some things in Ayurveda that I haven't gotten to yet. That in terms of using them in my practice, like the Rasa Shastra, using some of the heavy metals that are toxic to make what are called rasayanas for longevity. And when I first came back, when I used years ago, when I would go to India, I would bring 5, 6 suitcases as big as I could get. This is when things were different in the 80s. And I would bring back as many herbs as I could stuff in a suitcase, raw herbs. And that's how I filled my pharmacy up, was herbs that I could bring back. And I was also really fascinated with the longevity herbs, like the mercury rasayanas and the gold rasayanas, things that people took to live forever. I was fascinated by kayakalpa and longevity techniques. It was just something that I was super fascinated about. And I would bring these mercury rasayanas back to the States, and I'd have them heavy metal tested, and they were all loaded with heavy metals. And even though in India they said, oh no, they're purified, everything's completely pure, and I would bring it back here and go, nope, they're not. So I don't know where along the way the technique of purifying these heavy metals into super high, making mercury into gold and all that alchemy that they talk about, which is really fascinating for me. I was whatever I was, 28 years old, 29 years old, going to India and reading about all this. I was just fascinated by it all. Turned out a lot of it turned out to not be really available anymore. Like those herbs, those rasayanas really don't exist. And then, 10 years later, the New England Journal of Medicine publishes studies that how all the Ayurvedic herbs are loaded with heavy metals. And I was like, yeah, I figured that out 10 years ago. And that's why, I'm really a big believer that whenever you bring stuff in from India, you really need to bring it in as a raw material, test it here according to GMP FDA regulations, test it before the formulation, after the formulation, and make sure it's really the real deal. Where if you package your stuff in India, you ship it here, there's a lot of rubber stamping that goes on in terms of some of the organic certifications that take place and things like that. I had that happen. Whenever I would get a batch of herbs from India, it would always come with a heavy metal test that said clean, clean, clean. Then when I would test them, they were dirty, dirty, dirty. I mean, I never had it not happen that way. You know what I mean? I never had one that was clean in India and clean here. They were, back in the old days, So it just made me really nervous about using herbs that were from India, from a pharmacy I didn't know. And then the certifications, who's really checking those certifications, those kinds of things. Anyway, it's a little bit of a, but which is why we follow all the GMP certifications, and we make sure they're organic, we make sure they're heavy metal free, we make sure there's no bad bugs in them, because we test them multiple times when they come. And we ship stuff back too when it doesn't pass, for sure.
Yeah, it's very interesting. I think that's on a lot of people's minds more and more as we move into our future, the environmental toxicants exposure. Well, in terms of our conversation today, I'm really looking forward to diving into some of the longevity science. I know that's kind of a hot topic in general amongst the medical community, and anti-aging has always kind of been a thing. And personally, I kind of get a little bit repulsed from the term anti-aging, but longevity is like a whole nother story. It's like, yeah, I'm going to age, but I'm going to age gracefully. I'm going to maybe still get my gray hair or whatever it might be, but I'm going to have more health in my life, a greater health span. So talk to us a little bit about longevity through that Ayurvedic lens.
Well, that's, your fascination was exactly my fascination. And I can only just warn folks, like I, sort of, and I can't say that I didn't take a lot of herbs in the early days that probably shouldn't have, just
like what, for example?
Like gold rasayanas, mercury rasayanas, special herbs that were probably loaded with heavy metals that probably weren't really good for me to take. And then Dev did nothing for my longevity probably. And then when I got smarter, I started bringing them back and testing them. I would take them out myself, but before I'd ever consider giving it to somebody, I would want to make sure I would test it. And that's why I'm such a stickler about testing now, because I take, 15 of my herbs a day. I take a lot of my herbs. I'm a big believer. Those Those are the probiotics of nature, the plants, the roots that I eat that are organic. And I want to make darn sure if I'm putting that much in my mouth that it's legit. Like I don't have any, I'm not toxifying myself with pesticides or heavy metals. I mean, that's really important to me. So that's, for my family, for my friends, for my patients, I think it really matters. So anyway, point being about Rasayana, in the world of Rasayana, which is in Ayurveda, there's a branch of Ayurveda called Rasayana, and that's the study of longevity. And rasa means a handful of things, but rasa means lymph. Rasa means taste. Rasa means emotion. And it means really, in a way, special fluid. And so the study of these special fluids are very, very important. And rasa is the very first tissue that the body makes, and it starts when you put the food in your mouth. It creates a substance called ahara rasa. It's the first food bolus of the food that you eat. And what's interesting about Rasayana is that we always think Rasayana therapy, give me the pill to take to make me live forever. That's sort of our mentality. But that's only one of the Rasayana therapies is actually taking a pill. The other 4 or 5 major Rasayanas are all about lifestyle, diet, daily routine, lifestyle, how you treat and care for others, Achara Rasayanas, behavioral Rasayanas, different ways of caring for others. And I think that's a good place to really start before we start talking about herbs for longevity. And there definitely are ways and things to do for that as well. But, just in terms of the routine that you live, is your lifestyle in sync with circadian medicine? And I've got a whole section of articles and videos called Circadian Medicine, which talk about how to live in sync with the natural cycles. Well, Ayurveda 101 is circadian medicine, how to live in sync and in harmony with the natural cycle. So you don't feel exhausted at the end of the day. You don't feel exhausted at the end of your week. You don't feel like life is a struggle, an uphill battle that you have to recover from on the weekends. A lot of folks are sort of like that. They feel like, man, life's such a big struggle. In nature, life is not a struggle. You don't see the deer like huffing and puffing and exhausted, needing vacations. It's like, it's to recover. Nature is a beautiful flow, and we've lost that because we're constantly going upstream. We need to go find ways to get sort of back downstream again. Yeah. And that's understanding how to eat seasonally, understanding like in winter when it's cold, nature provides the antidote to that cold with nuts and seeds and soups and stews and more protein and more fat to help insulate you and balance your vata, balance your nervous system. It's the natural ebb and flow of things. And then, of course, if you go into spring, which we call kapha season, it's rainy, muddy, heavy. The only thing harvested in the spring is, some roots and some leafy greens and some berries, and it's really austere. So it's a natural calorie-restricted, kapha-reducing time of the year. There's no grains or pasta or any of that heavy vata balancing food that you get now in the fall for winter eating. The spring is a different animal. And if you start understanding that the microbes in the soil change from one season to the next, they are how we inoculate our gut with different bugs with each different season by eating the foods from the ground. Now, if you spray the food with some kind of spray and it kills the bugs, well, you just kill the big chunk of the intelligence of that plant. There's a symbiotic relationship between the plant and the microbes, and they work together as nutrition for us, but also as to support the right microbe in the right season so we can boost immunity in the winter and decongest us in the spring and help dissipate heat in the summer. That's all based on the microbiome that's changing seasonally. And that's now, I've written a lot about that. I wrote a book in 2000 about eating seasonally and found studies where, the soil bugs would change. But now, just a year ago, Stanford put out a study and found that in fact, the Hadza, last remaining hunter-gatherer tribe, the Hadza tribe in Africa, their bugs in their gut change from season to season to season. And our gut bugs are supposed to change from season to season to season, but they don't. Because we eat highly processed, sterile food that can stay on a shelf forever. And if the food was actually edible by any microbe or bacteria, it wouldn't stay on the shelf forever because that's what bugs do. They eat stuff and they're everywhere. So when you eat food that can stay on the shelf, like a loaf of bread is squishy for a month, and you put it in your mouth, well, the bugs would have eaten it if it was edible on the counter. So when you put that loaf of bread inside of you, the bugs won't eat it inside of you either. So where do all that, and what they preserve it with are these bad processed oils, and those oils go right to your liver and gallbladder. They congest your liver and gallbladder, which is the kingpin of digestive strength, your Agni, your digestive fire. And of course, if you don't have, good digestive fire, you're not going to digest, very, very well at all. So it's one of those things just where our longevity is based on the understanding that our lifestyle. And Ayurveda was so cool about understanding the most subtle things. Like, this is like a really subtle thing, the bugs on the broccoli that you're eating. You just don't think about that has anything to do with anything.
Totally. Yeah.
But the most subtle things turn out to be the most powerful. The microbiome, we can't see it, but it's turned out to be one of the most powerful discoveries in the last century, probably. In terms of, we still don't know much about it even.
And here we are kind of sterilizing things and trying to create this sterile environment.
Right.
So
that's
on the topic of like seasonality and the circadian rhythm or circadian medicine, beyond eating with the seasons, which kind of really makes intuitive sense to all of us as being earthlings here. What are other aspects of circadian medicine that you really witness the vast majority of society not really following that natural law of circadian rhythm and seasonality?
Well, there's the what to eat, which is seasonal eating. We talked about that. And for folks who want more on that, I publish a recipe list and a grocery list and a superfood list for free for every month of the year called the 3-Season Diet Challenge. So you just get info every month, like, here, this is what's in season. These are the flowers in the season. It just gives you all kinds of info about what the seasonal mandate for that month would be. Of course, then there's when you eat your food. And circadian medicine is very clear that you eat a breakfast and a lunch, and the same amount of calories of eating a lunch and a supper, and you're going to lose weight and get all these health benefits by having a breakfast and a lunch versus a lunch and a supper just by when you eat the food. Our digestive clock suggests that the biggest meal of the day should be in the midday meal. That's when digestion is stronger. Supper comes from the word super supplemental. That should be a smaller, lighter meal. And breakfast is a real critically important meal as well. So lighter breakfast, bigger lunch, lighter supper. Those are the circadian clocks. Eat as early as possible for supper. So you have a longer trip. It's for the breakfast, for breaking the fast in the morning. And that gets you aligned with your circadian clocks. So those are two ways to do it. But there's also the behavioral piece. Like, when you sit down and eat your food, your attitude, your intention, like if I took a container of yogurt right here and I screamed and yelled at it, the microbes in the yogurt would alter because they could feel those. To
that kind of the science of, I think Emoto, I forget his first name, the water crystals and intention and that sort of stuff.
Yeah, unfortunately, that science turned out to be a little bit flawed and not so great. So when it came out, I was super all over that. But now I don't use that anymore, only because that science was debunked. But now we have science to show that the microbes, for sure, whether the water crystals change or not, I think that needs to be done again, maybe better. But the microbes are altered by impression. And so when we are stressed out, when we're eating our food, we are impregnating that emotion onto the food. Now, Ayurveda would say stuff like, who grew the food, who harvested the food, who carried it to the market, and who cooked it, and the emotions and the attitude and the nature of their behavior would be a big part of the sattvic nature of the food. So there's 3 mental, emotional constructs. One is called sattva, which is loving, giving, and being joyful and kind for no reason. It's just your nature to give. And that's what you want to eat, is more sattvic food. If someone was loving the food and caring for the food, the microbes are feeling that impression. But if you're eating it in a rajasic way, stimulating, chopping it down, harvesting it, you sort of like getting stimulated, getting happy from stimulation in the environment, driving fast cars or, eating, stimulating food or buying things, all stimulation is called rajasic behavior. And we all have some of that. It's not a problem, but we overdo it, that becomes a problem. Our culture is a little bit tipped in the direction of reward chemistry, right? And then if you get overwhelmed by the reward and you become overwhelmed, you desensitize and you go into what's called tamasic behavior, which you just want to withdraw and retreat and check out, smoking pot, checking out, withdrawing. It kind of numbs you a little bit so you don't have to feel the pain. And sometimes you get stuck in that non-feeling, not, pain-free place, which is a lot of medications do for us as well. And that's not good either. So anyway, so Ayurveda is like all about trying to make things as sattvic as possible. Because we have proof that if I stick you next to a social disruptor, the bugs in your gut are going to change dramatically in a negative way because you're next to a social disruptor. Okay, if I sit next to someone and I give and care and love and appreciate another person, then the microbes have a positive effect on them. In fact, how we care for each other, the kind of giving we give to people makes a difference. There was a study done on what's called eudaimonic giving versus hedonistic giving. Hedonistic is I give you this present, but I really hope you like it and hope it fits and hope you say thank you to me. And that's me having a bit of a hook in there. I'm attached to the outcome. But if the other is what's called eudaimonic giving, where I just give, I don't really care if you like it. I just love giving it to you so much. But when I give it to you eudaimonically, it literally positively changes your genetic code. You can tell the difference because I'm giving to you from my heart, or I have a little bit of hope to get something in return. If I give it to you hedonistically, it negatively impacts your physiology in ways that are measurable. So it's like crazy, right? So when I'm giving to you with a little bit of, for me, involved, I'm literally, you literally can tell the difference if it's real or not real. You know what I mean? So you can't really fool the microbes who horizontally transfer genetic material to your genetic code. And so your bugs can feel it, and they are designed to feel the whole world. So they can tell the guy who grew the food and carried it to the market was having a bad day. All those impressions, all the sprays on the food were on the microbes are carried into our gut bugs. And then they transfer that material genetically to our gut bugs. And then our gut bugs take that information and transfer it to our genetic code. So the message is, hey guys, the bugs are telling us there's some crazy stuff going out there. There's glyphosate, weird stuff. You better get ready because it's going away. So we better genetically adapt to that. Otherwise, we're going to be done. And the bugs are on board because we keep them alive, right? So it's just sort of amazing how when you really look at it that logical way, it makes perfect sense, right? And that they are that subtle and that they are that sensitive. So the idea of when you sit down to eat your food and relax, you're literally impregnating that emotion into the food, which becomes your ahara rasa, the first lymphatic fluid in your intestinal tract, which carries that emotion into the production of every tissue in your body, from lymph to blood to muscle to bone to fat to nerve to reproductive tissue. And then finally, this really refined stuff Ayurveda calls ojas. It's the physical expression of consciousness, vitality, immunity, radiance, and all that happens if the procedure of making from lymph to blood, from blood to muscle, from muscle to fat, to bone, to nerve, to reproduction, all works perfectly, then you make ojas. But if it's stressed or emotionally challenged along the way, and stress can derail the production of ojas and the healthy production of the 7 tissues in the body, according to Ayurveda. So that's the Ayurvedic physiology of it all. But it all starts with the quality of sitting down and being there, eating Ayurveda, eat with their hands. All that creates this relationship with the food that creates a communication between our intelligence and the food's intelligence. It's just really beautiful. And now, something is something like no one would say, oh, eat calmly and relaxed. It doesn't make any, doesn't whatever, just eat. Well, there's just a lot of science to suggest that when you eat and when you have a ritual or pray before your meal, it literally changes the taste of the food. You don't eat as much, you feel more nourished after, and you're actually willing to pay more for food if you have a little mini ritual before the meal than if you didn't have that ritual. And that was the Harvard study that was done. It's crazy, right? So these little subtle things all add up. And that's what Ayurveda is about, or these little subtle things that add up to make Rasayana or longevity therapy.
Yeah, it's amazing. And as you're speaking, all of this, weaving it all together for me, it's all like, well, that's common sense. Well, that makes a lot of sense. It just resonates deeply. And I think we know it. And it's so interesting how we can grasp these studies to really point us to that deep knowing, that deep common sense, thing that we've all been connected with and experienced. So in this, rajasic, is that the adjective? Rajasic kind of society, disconnection from our food source, just the chaoticness, the chaos amidst our environment today. And obviously an antidote to that might be growing your own food or having a garden or just a farmer's market or something like that. But beyond that, do you have any recommendations to calm down and create more of a sattvic environment in the eating process, but beyond like just saying a prayer or something like that? Is there a way that we can antidote that energy?
I mean, I think there's a lot of ways. There's an old saying that says, if you eat standing up, death looks over your shoulder, which, obviously isn't good. And so, making sure you sit down and relax and eat your food. Just sit down and relax. When you eat in a relaxed way, you amp up what's called the parasympathetic nervous system. A lot of you remember from biology class, there's your sympathetic nervous system and your parasympathetic nervous system. Both are involuntary-ish. And so when you're fight or flight, running away from a bear, the body says, don't digest anything. All energy goes towards your muscles to run away and get up a tree, right? So digestion literally turns off during stress. And then when you get up a tree, save your life, and you find out it's a fruit tree, you're sitting up there and you can eat the fruit, and you're now parasympathetic levels go up, fight or flight goes back down, and you're actually now starting to feel like, hey, the digestive system turns on, literally by amping up parasympathetic rest, rebuild, rejuvenate nervous system activity. So when you eat stressed out on the run, you are totally eating during a time where your parasympathetic rest and digest nervous system is zeroed out, and your fight or flight, don't digest anything, is maxed out. So it's not going to do well for your digestion if you're eating that meal on the run, or in your car, or gobble and go, or eat unconsciously, right? So that's just absolute, biology 101 science, why we should eat. I mean, there's no fancy science there. It's just like basic neurology. Secondly, we talked about the ritual. Just, in a way, some of the rituals weren't even prayer. They were just like tapping your head or doing some stupid thing. It almost is like the Pavlov dog thing, where it just says, hey, I'm about ready to eat this food, and therefore I'm ready now to turn on all my digestive fire, right? If you're eating a meal and you're watching some scary movie on TV or some game or baseball game or whatever, and you're watching that and your mind's attached to that, and you're also then trying to eat your food, I mean, your stomach is like also part of this whole thing, watching TV, right? And all of a sudden this food just comes falling down on the stomach. It's like, whoa, what's going on? I mean, there's just no mind-body connection there at all. And again, that sounds like, oh, it's weird, like who doesn't eat in front of the TV? Well, again, Ayurveda is not about telling you what not to do. It's telling you, here are a bunch of things to try to do more of, right? Doesn't mean you should never watch TV in front of a movie again, no. But it means that you should start realizing that what you expose yourself to matters, and the subtle things accumulate over time. And a lot of times people, they get into their 50s and 60s and, we're not satisfied as a culture. We have more antidepressants and more anxiety than ever before. So you got to think something isn't working in the plan, right? So what did we ignore along the way? We just went into, like you said, more rajasic stimulating behavior. If I stimulate X to get Y, I'm going to get a reward chemistry from that. If I take sugar, I get dopamine. If I take caffeine, I get dopamine. If I buy stuff, I get dopamine. But the more you stimulate dopamine reward centers, the more stimulant you need to make them work. So dopamine receptors are self-limiting, means that the more that you stimulate them, the more stimulus you need. That's why drug addicts become drug addicts. It's because they need bigger doses, right? And then they become stuck in that way. And I think it's always a really good question to ask yourself, what's your personal addiction? Is it coffee, yoga, tea, banana bread, coffee, cigarettes? What's your thing? Is it,
Yeah, what's
where are
providing that
you?
dopamine, like dopamine hook?
It
Yeah,
might not be drugs, or
yeah,
sex or alcohol or something that's maybe more serious. It might be something that we think I can get away with, and part of my
yeah.
culture, I can drink 4 cups of coffee a day or something.
Yeah. Well, getting into other aspects of longevity beyond the seasoned out, the circadian medicine, and just being in line and in flow with the laws of nature and the cycles within nature. I know you've spoken to caloric restriction and kind of withdrawal of senses, and getting into you use the term drawing back the bow. So talk to us a little bit about that process and how that supports longevity, as we've been finding out through modern science.
I think there's two things there. One is the pulling back the bow comes from an aspect of the Vedic literature called Dhanurveda. Dhanar means the bow. Dhanurasana is the bow posture in yoga, and Dhanurveda is the Veda of transformation. To transform you from engaging in old repetitive patterns of behavior that you created as a young child to feel safe and secure, that we still project on the screen today as adults. So, and that's all based again on reward. I'm really hoping that you like me, so I'm going to project on the screen what my mind thinks you're going to like. So therefore, I'm not doing me, I'm doing a version of you that I think you're going to like. But the version of you that I'm reacting to isn't you either. It's a version of you that you think I will like. So I'm reacting to a
Mind
version,
blown. Yeah.
right? So I'm reacting to a version of you that's not you. You're reacting to a version of me that's not me. So we're not really communicating here
We're
until we
living in
get
our separate realities, kind of. Yeah.
right. And we get addicted to the reward chemistry, right? So I want the reward, which is to make you like me, approve of me, appreciate me. And then I go, yeah, that made me feel good. But that is really temporary. And most people know that, because then you're just off to the next, trying to manipulate your environment, your friends, your family to like you and approve of you and appreciate you. This is, not Vedic. It's what we call unconscious behavior. And the goal of Ayurvedic psychology, we just finished a whole Ayurvedic psychology course with Yoga Journal called Ayurveda 201. It's all about pulling back the bow, becoming more still and more silent, yoga, breathing, meditation as tools to still your mind. So you then become more self-aware. And then you take action, release the bow based on action from those places of deep silence where it's more real, not reacting to the environment, but pulling back the bow, accessing a deeper experience of yourself, which is always going to be more loving, giving, joyful, and kind, where we stimulate hormones like oxytocin, the exact opposite of dopamine, which you can produce as much oxytocin by giving and loving and caring for others and never run out of it and feel so blissed and live longer from that hormone, where dopamine will run you into the ground. Telomeres lengthen, which are measures of longevity when you give love, care, and you pull back the bow and meditate. We have hard science. Nobel Prize winning researcher Elizabeth Blackburn found that lengthening of your telomeres, which are the caps on your chromosomes, your DNA, when they lengthen, you live longer. And she found out that meditation will do that for you. So we also know, like we mentioned about the microbes, when you care, and give and love, and you're sattvic in your environment, your nature, and your eating and behavior, that has a powerful effect on the beneficial proliferation of microbes. And then there's even crazier, more subtle stuff, way more subtle than even thinking about, the farmer who wasn't having a happy day, and those impressions got onto the microbes on your food, and you eat those and carry those impressions. That sounds a little bit like over the top for most people, but there's science to back up that understanding now. But there's even more quantum physics science that really helps describe Vedic science even better. And there's these things called biophotons, which we emit and receive. And photons are particles of light, which means that they're both particle and waveform at the same time. And it turns out that these biophotons that we emit and receive are information carrying molecules, particles in our body that are moving. Einstein talked about them as spooky action at a distance. These biophotons can carry information at the speed of light and change with intention at great distances instantaneously. Well, now new research has shown that these biophotons literally can be changed by our intention. This is crazy, right? Way subtle, but again, start stacking up all the accumulation.
And once again, just speaking to what we already know, deep inside. We already know this, but we're seeing it scientifically.
Right. Exactly. Like prayer. There's a lot of science that says prayer works. And there's some science that says prayer doesn't work. But there's enough science to make you think there's something going on here. So there's biophotons that are coherent and incoherent. And it seems that if you can meditate, you create more measurable coherent biophotons. Now, if you meditate or pray with intention and create coherent biophotons with intention, it actually has a powerful effect on wherever your attention goes. Like in India, I mean, gosh, almost on every corner, there's a distance healer who says, bring me the picture of your aunt from Kentucky and I'll heal her. I mean, that's just normal, everyday sort of entertainment in India, on the streets of India, you know. But is that based on some Vedic truth or based on some quantum physics understanding? They took a rodent and they radiated this rodent and they put it into a chamber with a healthy rodent. And within just 48 hours, the healthy rodent had more radiation damage than the one that was radiated. And they measured the mechanism for that transference, and it was through biophotons. So, you know, this is a brand new area of science. And I've written a handful of articles about biophotons and the understanding from a Vedic perspective that are fascinating. But again, you know, it just all boils back down to pulling back the bow, living a sattvic life, giving, caring for others, simple things, really. You know, be aware of what you expose yourself to. If it's an overwhelming amount of stress or trauma or danger or you know, violence, then that will have a negative impact on so many parts of our physiology, where if you do the opposite, it has a positive impact on so many parts of our physiology. It's pretty crazy.
Yeah, I mean, in terms of the relevance of Ayurveda in our world today, that seems like kind of at the pinnacle of really what maybe we need to focus on in our society, in terms of in this Rajasic society, once again, being totally stimulated, totally overworked, and just overstimulated in so many ways. That seems like where the bulk of the opportunities lie for most people, is withdrawing a little bit, connecting with our truest, most authentic essence of who we are, and acting from there and spending more time there. Yeah. So do you have any practices or recommendations to point people in that direction in terms of, you know, yeah.
I mean, absolutely. There's, you know, a couple of years ago, one of the best longevity scientists, Walter Longa from USC, wrote a book called The Longevity Diet.
Yeah.
And the longevity diet, he has this thing called what he calls the fasting mimicking diet, because he cited a lot of research to suggest that fasting in the traditional sense can actually be harmful. Those studies were done back in the 80s, when the last big wave of fasting hit America. I mean, that's my first health book I ever read, was back in the 70s. Actually, it was Paul Bragg's Miracle of Fasting, and I was fasting like crazy. And it turns out that if you don't contract your gallbladder enough on a regular basis, the bile in there, which is 15 to 20 times concentrated already, can turn into sludge or stones. Number one abdominal surgery in America today is gallbladder removal surgery. So, you know, this researchers thought that, you know, I can't give people just a fasting diet to increase stem cell activation or to increase autophagy, which is cellular repair. I need to do it with a certain amount of foods, right? So he measured these scientists back in the 90s, Roy Walford, who went into this biosphere where 7 scientists spent 2 years in this biosphere, grew their own food, and they got really skinny. I mean, they shrunk. Their organs literally shrunk. And this guy Longo was the scientist that evaluated them when they came out. And he noticed that their organs grew back to normal size. And he was like, that only happens with stem cells. So he started doing stem cell research on fruit flies and then mice and then humans, and found out that he could activate stem cells and autophagy simply by giving the very specific type of calorie restriction. So when I read that, I was like, oh my God, this is exactly the Ayurvedic diet. I mean, the Ayurvedic cleanses, which are ghee and khichdi cleanses, almost mimic those prescriptions of how much calorie of fat and protein and carbs you need to activate stem cells and activate autophagy. And we have 3 cleanses now, one called the Colorado Cleanse, which is a 2-week khichdi and ghee cleanse, a 4-day short home cleanse, which is a free ebook you can download, which is 4 days. And they like almost identically match the stem cell research. But then I decided to take the Kaya Kalpa, which means the transformation of the body, and make a 5-day cleanse, which exactly mimics the longevity science, and use the precise amount of ghee and khichdi every meal, along with the Kaya Kalpa recommendations of rest, isolation, sensory, destimulation. So we actually become, desensitized into our environment. Get yoga, breathing, meditation. Really wanted to put together a cleanse where people could really pull back that bow, get the exact science in terms of the food they eat, the herbs that actually build stem cells were documented, and those were the original Kaya Kalpa herbs, and then the yoga, breathing, meditation, lifestyle for 5 days to just really go into retreat, that most people never give themselves a chance to do. And so that's the Kaya Kalpa cleanse. That's also a free ebook. You can just read it if you like. Anybody can grab it and get the information. And so it's a pretty cool thing. But that's one of the ways you can help yourself live longer, is on a seasonal basis, is to help your body transition from one season to the next by really, in our culture, it boils down to your liver and your gallbladder. If that gets congested, you won't make the bile you need to go to the bathroom regularly, to sweep your intestinal lining, to buffer the acid in your stomach to digest hard to digest foods. And then in short order, you're starting to become food intolerant. You start taking away wheat and dairy and nuts and seeds and corn and lectins and grains and legumes out of your diet because you just don't feel good eating them. And somebody writes a book saying they're really bad for you. So you go, oh, that must be the solution. Don't eat all these foods that are, by definition, the reason we have gut immunity is because the hard to digest anti-nutrients on grains and nuts and seeds and lectins and beans and tomatoes and fruits, all those things are the stimulation of an immune system. When you take them away and give the body sterile food, pre-digested processed food, you don't need an immune system. You don't need a digestive system for that. So sort of like the body on welfare, why bother having an immune system? Everything's been purified for me.
Yeah.
That's a great idea, for symptomatic relief of your digestive problem. But what happens in 5-10 years when these superbugs come along and you don't have an immune system to fight it? We're already seeing studies like that. People who are gluten-free have 4 times more mercury in their blood than people who eat wheat. Less good bugs, more bad bugs than people who eat wheat. And their killer T cells, a measure of immune strength, way more in people who eat wheat than people who are gluten-free. It's just the beginning of the science starting to come in saying, this is a really bad idea. Last time we took food out of our diet was back in the 60s. They said cholesterol was bad. That turned out to be a disaster. Heart disease is still ramping up. We haven't solved that problem. That was the reason we did that. And we have now other issues like anxiety, depression, obesity, and 74% of the population have digestive issues, and gallbladders are being removed left and right. And you can blame all of those things on gallbladder, liver function issues and lymph issues, which are directly impacted by really bad, highly processed fats that preserve the food, extend shelf life of food. Definitely not your life, just the food's life. And there you have it. Those are the things we have to be aware of.
Thank you so much for speaking to all of that. You covered a lot right there, which is important stuff. Maybe listeners might have to go back and re-listen just because it was full of good stuff.
Yeah.
You blasted it, but that's okay. I'm curious what your perspective is of Valter Longo's current project with the fasting mimic eating diet, because my understanding is, it's a calorie restrictive diet, like you said, that is a blend of, you said, the macros in proportion that promote stem cell activation, all this stuff. But it's missing that, what I see as a very critical piece of that withdrawal of senses. And, a lot of people are just doing this fasting mimicking diet while they're running and gunning and going throughout their life, which is by definition kind of unsustainable. So what's your
Yeah.
perspective on the matter?
Well, I think that's why Ayurveda is so important, and why it's really important not to throw away, time-tested wisdom. And for that matter, our elderly population who carry a lot of wisdom as well. We just tend to throw all that away and give me the new high-tech thing. But you realize that, the new high-tech stuff are proving every day this ancient wisdom all the time. And the stuff we're talking about today, these little subtle things, just to start to begin to become aware of those things, like, getting off the grid for a weekend, turning off the Wi-Fi, and turning off the electricity, and just doing a no artificial light weekend with no Wi-Fi to reset your circadian clock, literally one weekend by 76%. Literally resets your melatonin cortisol ratio levels, where cortisol goes up in the daytime and melatonin goes up at night. Resets that for you. So we have science to suggest that, and they took like healthy Boulder people who are going 90 miles an hour, and they measured their melatonin, and they were off the charts, wildly out of whack. And then they took them to the mountains, no cell phones, no nothing, for a week, 100% reset of their clock. For a weekend, another group, 70 something, 68%, I think it was, reset of their clock. So, things like that are really powerful to realize that, we're going really fast down this road, and, there might be some checks and balances that we're ignoring along the way. And Ayurveda can provide some of that. Yoga, breathing, meditation. Just keep remembering, pull back the bow. This world is so fascinating out there, but there's inner space. One of my favorite Deepak Chopra quotes is that the inner space is proportionally as void as outer space, the space between ourselves. And I tell my kids that a lot. I go, look, it's really cool out there, but what's in here is just as cool and just as expansive and just as unknown. And we need to look there too. And that's all these techniques to just stop, pull back the bow. And that's where our creative potential comes into play too. And I think that's a really important thing for us to take from the ancient wisdom into this modern world, so we don't completely burn ourselves out.
Yeah, but I've got all these obligations. I've got, work and kids and finances. And, how do you communicate with people who are up against the wall with obligations in their life? I imagine you do a fair amount of kind of coaching or counseling around these issues.
It's always, in Ayurveda, and I probably did overwhelm everybody here today, because, the Ayurveda is loaded with little things you can do that will take all day to do all the, if you did all the Ayurvedic stuff, you would do nothing but Ayurvedic stuff all day. Right. And probably die sooner because you're so stressed out about doing all those little things. So the big picture is to be happy, to be joyful, to be loving, to be caring, to appreciate the simple things. Going into nature, being into nature has been well studied in Ayurveda and also in Japan. And now we have this thing called, forest bathing or nature therapy. All of those have, real value. And I think when I coach my patients, simple things like getting into nature, relaxing when you're eating your food, but I always try to find the one or two things that they can do that are doable for them, and put my foot in the door and just see if I can just get some healthy lifestyle tips into their routine. Sometimes it's with an herb to get them to have the energy that they can then be more in sync with the natural cycles or have a lifestyle change. Sometimes it's with a lifestyle change. Maybe it's exercise. Maybe it's how they do their yoga, and, getting out of hot yoga. I can't tell you how many hot yogis that were pitta, fiery body types that felt like $1 million as soon as they stopped doing that. And all their arthritis and joint pain, inflammation went away. Inflammation has the word flame in it. And if you're a hot person in a hot yoga doing hot stuff every day of the week, you run the risk of more inflammation. And I wrote an article about the science on both sides of that if you want to see both sides. But there's always two sides, but still the right person, for, the right constitution, the right lifestyle, the right yoga, the right diet, the right behavior, the right amount of nature. Turns out the new science shows we need about 120 minutes a week in nature to get cumulative benefits from nature, which is different. The air you breathe, the microbes in the air in nature is different than the microbes anywhere else. So they're seasonally changing as well. There's something special that takes place in nature that I think entrains our genetics that we came from that, right? It wasn't that long ago we were all living off the land, and so we have very strong genetics to entrain with that. Same way we have very strong genetics to entrain with dogs. We have both genes to do that. We have genes for nature. We have genes to want to be still. We long for that silence, that peace. So that's, in a lot of ways doable for most folks. It's not always the easiest thing to do, but I always try to find the piece of the puzzle that's doable for them. That's my job, figuring out how do I get this to be a deal that they're willing to make that will make them feel better, so they're willing to take the next step and the next step, and they get back on the road of building themselves versus degenerating and getting older.
Great. Well, we covered a lot in this conversation, from the food and eating with the rhythms of nature and living with the cycles of nature, and also, drawing back that bow and going inward into inner space. And on the topic of longevity, I'm curious if there's anything that was kind of missed, or if anything that you'd like to emphasize and drive home in this conversation, specifically maybe for people who might be a little bit confused and overwhelmed with this whole emerging topic of longevity and anti-aging.
Well, I think that, a couple of things that, that our culture is like, hey, what can I take to live longer? Well, there are herbs that have been proven to increase stem cell activation. And there are herbs that are what are called brain-derived neurotropic factors, which increase brain cell production. So there are herbs now that really do that. Meditation has been shown to upregulate over 5,000 different genes in a positive way. So just, meditation, I think of it as almost like a biohack for, our genetics of being in nature and just living in that silence. And now we have a way to just create that silence in our room, even though we're in the city, right? That's kind of pretty cool. But the things that will increase brain cell activation, ashwagandha has been proven to be a brain-derived neurotropic factor. Turmeric also increases stem cells as well as a brain-derived neurotropic factor. Fish oils are also a brain-derived neurotropic factor. Two other herbs that build stem cells we use in our Kayakalpa cleanse, the Brahmi, Centella asiatica or Goticola, and Amalaki, the amla fruit. And then vitamin D also, that upregulates about 2,000 of our genes, and that's a deficiency that affects a big chunk of the people. And as we go into the winter, you want to be thinking winter herbs like ashwagandha, turmeric, amalaki, and vitamin D. Those are the winter rebuilders for us that would be in nature now. If we were living off the land, we'd be eating those. And maybe fish oils, because the cold water fish leave Alaska in the winter, then you fish them down here, and you get more of those omega-3 fish, winter cold water fish oils this time of the year. So that would be, vitamin D, fish oils, turmeric, ashwagandha, and amalaki, the things to think about. And on my website, lifespa.com, you can type in those herbs and read about them, read the science and the seasonality of them, and get to know them a little bit. So kind of a fun process. And they're all rasayanas. They all build longevity.
Awesome. Yeah, I love how everything is so simple, but not really. It's like there's a cyclic nature to understanding. It's not like you just pop these pills and take these herbs and go on with your day. You have to. It's what I hear is you have to recognize where they fit into the greater context of the world that we're uniquely living in. And an herbal regime for somebody here on the, in the Rocky Mountains might be different for someone in Hawaii or something, in a more tropical climate. So that it's very simple, but also highly individualized is what I hear and appreciate. And thank you so much for sharing your wisdom and articulating so many kind of deep, complex things in such a way that I think we can all really connect with and relate with. And obviously people know where to find you at lifespa.com, and you've got your Life Spa podcast. And any other kind of ways to connect with what you're doing? I know you've got amazing resources on your website and all the cleanses and stuff. But
yeah, I
what
mean,
else? Yeah.
3 times a week we publish a newsletter, that has videos that talk about the ancient wisdom and modern science. So that's my current thinking is always what I'm publishing, recently. So that's kind of, really interesting. And then of course our two new courses, the Ayurveda 101 and 201 Ayurvedic psychology, that we put out through Yoga Journal. They're on my website as well, but they're pretty cool. Tying yoga, breathing, meditation to Ayurveda. Ayurveda 101 is all about seasonal. You're doing the right yoga, breathing, meditation, and food for each season. So you get a packet of yoga, breathing, meditations that changes with each season, which is really cool. And then the Ayurvedic psychology is that part we talked about, pulling back the bow, realizing how unconscious we are and how we can become conscious with yoga, breathing, meditation, and self-inquiry strategies. Pretty cool program, actually.
Cool. Amazing. All right. Well, thanks for sharing your wisdom in all of the formats that you are doing and on here on this podcast. So I do appreciate you and look forward to staying in touch and through all the facets that you're connected with. So thanks again, and peace and love until next time.
Thanks for having me. Appreciate it.